Recently, I found myself in a conversation with my daughter that sparked a fascinating line of inquiry. She expressed her frustration about how slowly Christmas seemed to approach, saying the holiday couldn't come soon enough. In that moment, I was struck by the irony of our different experiences. From my perspective as an adult, the same holiday appears with alarming frequency. It feels like Christmas arrives almost constantly, with barely enough time between celebrations to prepare mentally or materially. This observation isn't unique to me. When you ask adults over the age of 40 about their subjective experience of time, a striking majority, approximately 77%, will confirm that they experience each Christmas and other annual markers as arriving far more rapidly than they did in their younger years. This widespread phenomenon deserves serious attention. It's not merely a poetic reflection on the passage of youth or a nostalgic memory distortion. This is a measurable, quantifiable experience grounded in objective scientific research. The question that naturally follows is both profound and unsettling. Is time actually moving faster for those of us who have accumulated more years? Or does this apparent acceleration exist only in our minds, a trick of perception played by our aging brains? If it is indeed an illusion, what exactly creates this illusion, and what underlying mechanisms produce it? By the conclusion of our exploration together, you will develop a deep understanding of something genuinely remarkable. Time is not what you instinctively believe it to be. We tend to visualize time as a constant river, flowing at an unchanging rate, or perhaps as an endless sequence of ticks from some cosmic clock that marks off moments with mechanical precision. However, the reality is far more complex and far more interesting. The time that you experience, your subjective temporal reality, is not a fundamental property of the universe that you passively observe. Instead, it is actively constructed by your brain in every moment, assembled from instant to instant according to principles and rules that neuroscience is only now beginning to comprehend. Once you truly grasp how this internal machinery operates, you will never again look at a clock in quite the same way. The novelty effect. How experience creates subjective duration. Let me begin with a scenario that likely resonates with many of you. Consider the experience of driving to an unfamiliar destination for the first time. Perhaps you're attempting to locate a friend's residence in an area of town you've never visited before. During this journey, your attention is fully engaged. Your eyes track every street sign, you note the numbers on passing houses, you process the appearance of each intersection and building. Everything is fresh and novel. You're absorbing an enormous amount of new information. When you finally arrive at your destination, your immediate assessment is likely to be something like, "Wow, that took quite a long time." Now imagine making the return journey home. The distance is identical. You drive along the exact same route. Traffic conditions are comparable. Yet something remarkable happens. The return trip subjectively feels substantially shorter than the outbound journey, in some cases significantly shorter, but nothing objective has changed. The road hasn't contracted. Your vehicle hasn't suddenly developed superior acceleration. The only variable that has shifted is you, specifically your internal state regarding the journey's content. You've already experienced the route. The novelty that characterized the first journey is completely absent. This phenomenon provides our first critical insight into the mystery of perceived time. Your brain does not create and store memories of every single moment with equal care and attention. To do so would be extraordinarily inefficient and wasteful of mental resources. Instead, your neural system is constantly engaged in a sort of ongoing assessment. Is this experience new to me? Is this information significant and important? Have I encountered this stimulus or situation previously? Depending on the answers to these questions, your brain either initiates a detailed recording process, creating what we might call a snapshot or memory trace, or it glosses over the experience with minimal encoding. Consider the radical difference in information processing between childhood and adulthood. In early life, virtually everything qualifies as new. A child encounters the world for the first time. Every day introduces experiences that have never been encountered before. Learning to ride a bicycle for the first time is fundamentally different from every other experience that came before it. Starting school represents an entirely novel context. Witnessing a thunderstorm creates new sensory experiences and emotions. Even seemingly simple experiences like an ice cream cone falling to the ground can generate powerful emotional memories. During childhood, the brain's encoding machinery runs at maximum capacity, working overtime to record and store all these unprecedented experiences in rich, detailed form. The situation transforms dramatically upon reaching adulthood. Ask yourself honestly, how dramatically different is this Tuesday from last Tuesday? How substantially does this year differ from the year that preceded it? The typical adult's daily routine follows a predictable, repetitive pattern. You awake in the morning, engage in personal hygiene, travel to work, spend hours in professional duties, return home, possibly consume entertainment media before sleeping, and then repeat the entire cycle. When the brain encounters experiences that are fundamentally similar to things it has already processed many times before, it doesn't allocate significant neural resources to detailed encoding. There's nothing novel to learn, nothing surprising to process. Instead, the brain compresses the experience, skips over large portions of it, creates fewer detailed snapshots. This is where a profound distortion occurs. When you later attempt to judge how long a particular period of your life lasted, your brain relies on a heuristic that is efficient but fundamentally misleading. It estimates duration based on the quantity of memories you've retained from that period. Few memories must mean the period was short. Many memories must indicate the period was lengthy. Your brain is essentially lying to you, but it's lying based on its own system of lazy and inefficient record keeping. This creates a cruel temporal paradox. The periods of your life that felt longest while you were experiencing them, because you were bored and acutely aware of each moment's passage, compress into almost nothing when you look back. Meanwhile, periods that passed rapidly in the moment, because you were engaged and your attention was fully absorbed, feel substantial in retrospect, thanks to the rich memories you've retained. The mathematical structure of perception, Weber, Fechner, and psychological scaling. While memory effects provide one explanation for our changing relationship with time, a more mathematical and precise framework exists for understanding this phenomenon. This framework emerged from research conducted in 19th century Germany, undertaken by two scientists named Weber and Fechner, who were interested in how human beings perceive everything, not just time, but light, sound, weight, and tactile sensations. Weber conducted an elegant experiment that revealed a counterintuitive principle about human perception. He blindfolded a subject and placed a weight 1 kilogram into their hand. He then gradually added more weight, asking the person to indicate when they first noticed the additional weight. He discovered something striking. The subject required approximately 50 grams of additional weight before they consciously perceived the change. However, Weber then tested the same principle with a heavier baseline weight. When the subject was holding 10 kilograms, the same 50 grams of additional weight went entirely unnoticed. Instead, the subject required approximately 500 grams, 10 times more, before detecting any difference. This led to a crucial insight. The amount of change needed to be detected depends not on any absolute measure, but on the proportion relative to what already exists. Fechner expanded on Weber's work and proposed that the relationship between actual physical intensity and perceived intensity follows a logarithmic function rather than a linear one. In mathematical terms, this can be expressed as perceived intensity equals some constant multiplied by the natural logarithm of actual intensity. What does this mean in practical terms? It means that human perception operates on a compressed scale. When you're holding something light, adding a small amount feels quite significant. When you're holding something heavy, you need an enormous addition before your perception registers the difference. We don't perceive reality on an absolute scale. We perceive it relative to what we're already experiencing. Now, here's where this mathematical principle becomes profoundly relevant to our investigation of time. What if we apply the Weber-Fechner law to the experience of time itself? Think about a single year of life as if it were a stimulus, a unit of sensory input. For a 5-year-old child, 1 year represents 20% of everything they've ever experienced. It's an enormous fraction, 1/5 of their entire existence. That single year looms large in their perception. They can vividly separate this year from the previous year. But consider a 50-year-old adult. For this person, 1 year represents just 2% of their total accumulated life experience. It's a tiny fraction, barely a rounding error in the context of 5 decades of living. The exact same 365 days, the same seasonal cycles, the same physical duration, but contextualized against a vastly different lifetime backdrop. If we apply the Weber-Fechner logarithmic relationship to time itself, we arrive at a striking prediction. Perceived time should follow a logarithmic curve rather than a linear one. The earliest years of life should feel extraordinarily long in subjective experience. Then, as each succeeding year becomes an increasingly smaller proportion of total lifetime experience, time should progressively accelerate. The mathematics actually aligns remarkably well with the subjective experiences reported by millions of people across different cultures and time periods. This isn't speculation or poetry. This is quantifiable psychophysics. It's the same compression algorithm that your brain applies to weight, brightness, and loudness being applied to your fundamental sense of temporal passage. To illustrate this principle more concretely for those who are younger and may not immediately resonate with these numbers, when you're 10 years old, 1 year constitutes 10% of your entire life. When you're 50, that same year represents only 2%. We're talking about identical amounts of clock time, but from a perceptual standpoint, that year at 50 subjectively passes 5 times faster than it did at 10. Fast forward to age 80, if you're fortunate enough to reach that milestone, and a single year has shrunk to just 1.25% of your lifetime experience. At that point, a year passes subjectively at 16 times the speed it did during childhood. This isn't poetry or metaphor. This is your brain executing the same mathematical compression algorithms on temporal experience that it applies to every other sensory domain. The neurobiology of temporal perception, eyes, processing, and the internal clock. Having established the psychological mechanisms at work, we now arrive at the physics and neurobiology you might expect from this discussion. The hardware of perception, the actual biological machinery in your head, changes measurably with age, and these changes directly impact how you experience time. Consider your visual system, which is central to how you sample and process the world. Your eyes don't operate continuously, like a video camera recording an uninterrupted stream. Instead, they move through the visual environment in small, rapid jerks called saccades. Between these jerks, your eyes pause briefly on particular objects or regions, gathering information during these fixation periods. Then they jump to another location, fixate again, and so forth. Your brain stitches all these snapshots together into what feels like a smooth, continuous movie of reality, but it's actually a series of discrete samples. Here's where aging becomes critical. The temporal characteristics of these saccades change substantially across the lifespan. Infants possess very brief fixation periods. Their eyes dart around constantly, sampling the world at remarkably high frequencies, taking numerous mental pictures with each passing second. As people age, however, the fixation periods lengthen. The saccadic movements slow down. Neural pathways become increasingly complex and simultaneously increasingly degraded. The neural signals that travel from the eye to the brain require longer to transit. The entire perceptual system becomes less responsive, less rapid, more sluggish. A mechanical engineer named Adrian Bejan at Duke University made a brilliant intuitive leap by observing this phenomenon. He proposed thinking about time perception using a cinematic metaphor. Imagine your perception of the world as analogous to frames in a movie or a video camera recording reality. When you're young, your brain is capturing many frames per second, let's say 60 frames per second, equivalent to a modern video camera or a high-quality film. Everything appears smooth and fluid. Each moment feels richly detailed and substantial because it contains so many mental snapshots compressed within it. A single second of clock time feels full because you're experiencing numerous internal mental moments within that second. Now contrast this with the aging brain. As you grow older, perhaps your brain is only capturing 10 frames per second. The same physical second of clock time passes, but it contains far fewer distinct mental images. It's like watching an old, lower-quality film where the action appears jerky and everyone seems to be moving unnaturally fast. The clock on the wall hasn't changed. The outside world isn't moving any faster. What has fundamentally altered is the rate at which your internal camera is sampling reality. You're taking fewer snapshots per unit of external time. Your internal sampling rate has decreased. Time, therefore, subjectively compresses relative to the external world, which continues at its normal pace. Let me pause to ensure this explanation is clear. I want to present this concept the way I would explain it to a bright 12-year-old child. Imagine you have a flip book, one of those little booklets where you draw a slightly different picture on each page. When you flip through the pages rapidly, the images create the illusion of motion and animation. The more pages your flip book contains, the smoother and longer the resulting animated sequence appears. During childhood, your brain is constantly drawing numerous pages in your life's flip book. Each day generates many detailed entries because so much that happens is novel and worthy of detailed encoding. Therefore, when you later flip back through your childhood flipbook, you encounter a thick stack of pages. It takes a long time to flip through them all, creating the subjective impression of childhood being vastly extended. In contrast, when you're an adult, your brain becomes more efficient and consequently more lazy about its page drawing. It only creates a detailed page when something genuinely interesting or novel happens. Most days look largely similar to the days that preceded them, so the brain minimizes its effort. The flipbook for a typical year in adulthood is thin, just a few pages. When you flip back through it, the entire year passes in a flash. The thickness of your flipbook, the density of memories you've retained, directly determines how long that period of time feels when you remember it retrospectively. This should make intuitive sense now. Memory, fear, and the reality of slowed time. Now I want to describe a remarkable experiment that challenges some conventional assumptions about time perception and offers fascinating insights. A neuroscientist named David Eagleman dedicated his research to understanding time perception, particularly the phenomenon where people in life-threatening situations report that time seemed to slow down dramatically. But Eagleman asked a deeper question. When people make these reports, are they actually perceiving more detail in real time as though they were truly experiencing the world in slow motion like an action movie? Or is this slowed time effect only apparent in retrospect, a memory phenomenon rather than a true alteration of real-time perception? To investigate this question, Eagleman and his team conducted a rather unconventional experiment. They recruited volunteers and literally dropped them from a 15-story tower. I'm not exaggerating, this was an actual drop. The participants engaged in SCAD diving, which involves plunging backward in free fall for approximately 2.5 seconds before being caught safely in a net. Understandably, this is an absolutely terrifying experience for the participants. Eagleman equipped each diver with a special device strapped to their wrist. This device displayed numbers at extremely high speeds, so rapid that under normal conditions people couldn't read the numbers at all. The experimental question was elegantly simple. If time genuinely slowed down during the terror of the fall, would the divers' perceptual abilities improve to the point where they could actually read these rapidly displayed numbers? If their subjective time dilation were real, their perception should become acute, like watching slow-motion film. If their brain really was sampling reality more frequently, they should be able to consciously process information that would normally be far too rapid to perceive. The results were surprising and illuminating. The divers absolutely could not read the numbers. Their perceptual resolution did not improve during the fall. They didn't experience genuine slow-motion perception. Yet here's the fascinating part. When the divers later estimated how long they'd actually been falling, they consistently reported durations that were approximately 36% longer than the objective elapsed time. They felt like they'd been in free fall significantly longer than they actually had been. This discrepancy reveals something crucial about time perception and fear. The experience of time slowing down during frightening moments is not happening in real time as the event unfolds. Rather, it's happening in retrospect, in memory. During the fall, the divers' brains weren't capturing extrasensory frames or experiencing actual slow-motion perception. What was occurring was something more subtle and more interesting. The terrifying experience was being encoded into memory with extraordinary richness and detail. The emotional intensity and the novelty of the situation forced the brain to create an exceptionally detailed memory trace. Later, when the divers recalled and reflected upon the experience, all that accumulated rich detail created the subjective impression that the event had lasted longer than it actually did. This finding directly connects to our larger investigation into aging and time perception. If novel, emotionally significant, and surprising experiences are encoded particularly deeply in memory, then they will necessarily seem to last longer when recalled. Childhood is essentially overflowing with these kinds of experiences, novel situations, emotional peaks and valleys, surprising discoveries at nearly every turn. Adulthood, by contrast, contains proportionally fewer of these deeply encoding experiences unless you deliberately cultivate them. This difference in encoding intensity contributes significantly to the differential temporal perception between young and old. Busyness is not the primary factor, the actual role of novelty. Before proceeding further, I want to explicitly challenge a common misconception that I believe is fundamentally backward. Many people assume that time seems to accelerate with age because our lives become busier. We accumulate jobs, mortgages, family responsibilities, and obligations that fill our calendars. Life becomes hectic and chaotic, leaving no time for reflection or present moment awareness. According to this theory, all this busyness explains why time flies by so rapidly. But this reasoning is actually inverted. Consider what genuinely makes time feel slow during immediate experience. The answer is boredom. When you're bored to distraction, staring at a clock as you wait for something to end, perhaps trapped in a tedious meeting or standing in an exasperating line, time becomes agony. Every single second feels extended. You're hyper-aware of each moment's passage. Minutes feel like eternities. Conversely, when you're fully engaged, deeply absorbed in something you find compelling, when you're having a genuinely good time, time disappears. Hours evaporate. You look up and suddenly it's midnight. You've lost all conscious awareness of time's passage because your attention was so thoroughly captured. This creates a paradox that researchers have documented and labeled the time paradox, also called the holiday paradox. If busyness made time feel faster, you would expect that periods of busyness would feel short while you're in them, but then feel long in retrospect. Conversely, boring periods should feel long while you're in them, but compress when you look back. Yet research actually reveals the opposite pattern. When you're on vacation, experiencing novel activities each day, exploring new environments and engaging with new people, time flies by in the moment. Each day evaporates. But when you reflect on that vacation afterward, it seems to have lasted for an extensive period because the vacation generated so many rich, detailed memories. By contrast, a boring week at home where you stayed in familiar environments, engaged in familiar routines, did nothing particularly novel, that week felt interminable while you were living through it. Time seemed to crawl. But later, when you try to remember what you did that week, you find yourself at a loss. The week compressed down to almost nothing. The question, "What did you do last week?" generates the response, "I don't know. Nothing much. It's a blur." This is the fundamental truth. The apparent speed of life isn't determined by how busy you are in the conventional sense. It's determined by how much novelty you're experiencing, how many new neural patterns and memories you're generating, how thick you're making your flipbook of experiences. The reminiscence bump. Why we remember youth so vividly. Psychologists have conducted numerous studies in which they ask older adults to recall memories from throughout their entire lifespan. The research participants generate as many autobiographical memories as they can, and researchers then plot these memories according to the age at which they occurred. This creates a fascinating and consistent pattern across cultures and decades of research. There's a distinctive bulge or bump in the distribution, centered around ages 15 to 25. During this decade-long period, people recall disproportionately numerous memories compared to any other period of equal length. Far more memories emerge from late adolescence and early adulthood than the statistical distribution would predict based on a simple forgetting curve. This is called the reminiscence bump, and it's one of the most robust and universal findings in memory research. What makes this period so special and so memorable? It is quite simply the era of firsts. First romantic kiss, first meaningful job or career step, first experience of living independently away from family, first vehicle you could call your own, first significant heartbreak, first genuine taste of autonomy and adult decision-making. Everything during this period is new. Everything carries emotional weight and significance. Everything is vivid and worth encoding in detail because the brain is encountering it for the first time. The brain's memory encoding machinery is operating at maximum capacity. The result is memory traces of extraordinary richness. This insight illuminates why the years from 15 to 25 feel, in retrospect, like they lasted longer than any other decade of a person's life. It's not that time literally slowed down during those years from a physics standpoint. Rather, the brain was generating memories at a furious rate, creating an exceptionally thick flipbook for those years. When we later reflect on them, the abundance of detailed memories creates the subjective impression of a vast stretch of time. For most people, after age 30, the frequency and intensity of these first experiences begins to decline substantially. Life settles into patterns. Routines establish themselves. The brain doesn't need to encode new patterns as constantly because many situations have already been encountered. Memories from adulthood increasingly blur together, and precisely as the quantity of encoded memories decreases, time perception accelerates. This represents a beautiful but somewhat melancholic symmetry. The very mechanism that makes youth feel temporally extended is the same mechanism that makes adulthood feel compressed. However, this is not an inevitable destiny. The research on older adults who remain mentally and psychologically engaged reveals hope and possibility. There is an emerging field of study around superages, individuals who maintain cognitive and emotional engagement throughout later life. These people show measurably better time perception than their age-matched peers. The neurological decline still occurs, but its impact is substantially blunted by continued engagement with novelty, learning, and new experiences. The worst possible scenario unfolds when someone falls into complete routine, when every day becomes identical to the last, when learning ceases, when nothing surprises or challenges the brain anymore. In such circumstances, the brain stops bothering to encode. The flipbook pages become impossibly thin, and years vanish like weeks.